I am from Northeast Arkansas originally, born and raised in Jonesboro, Arkansas. My parents, when I was the age of 8, we had gone on a couple of vacations with our cousins, my cousins, their sisters and brothers, to Destin, Florida, and other places. And we realized we weren't really beach people. And my parents made the mistake of taking me on spring break when I was 8 to Winter Park, Colorado, to go skiing. And for an 8-year-old who was generally athletic and loved it, I just pointed the skis downhill and never stopped. So we kept going back every year from on spring break. That was our one vacation. We looked forward to it, and I developed an identity around it, which I think the writing will explore a little bit more detail. But what happened was I went to college and then graduated and immediately went out west and moved to Denver, Colorado, and tried my hand at being a Westerner in downtown urban Denver, and it didn't work out so well. I had a good time, and I worked for a couple of those publications. I learned that I didn't really like seeing my name in print for whatever reason, but I had a great time, learned from some really great writers down there, served a lot of Bloody Marys and mimosas to people eating brunch. It's a big thing in Denver if you've never been. So that's how I made most of my money, and it financed me moving up to Montana for graduate school when I was 24. So the story I want to tell you, just a real short story, is my origin story of coming into Montana, which involves a 24-year-old kid who was maybe stupid and maybe brash, but decided, and also thoughtful, because it was late January, and I realized, looking through the University of Montana website, that I could get in-state residency after a fall semester of going here, if I got accepted, if I came and got there by February 1st. So about January 15th, I decided, let's make a go of it. And on January 29th that year, that was 2008, it was 20 below zero with a 35-mile-an-hour wind blowing sideways, and I had a U-Haul full of whatever a 24-year-old has. Why I got a U-Haul, I don't know. I had bikes and posters. That's about it. But I drove from Steamboat Springs all the way to Pocatello, Idaho that day, the first day, and spent the night. But when I hit Craig, Colorado, I stopped for gas, and it was so frigid cold outside, and sideways wind, and this older man in a serape and a hat with a really old cloth suitcase came up and just looked pleadingly into my eyes as I was in the driver's seat waiting for my truck to finish gassing up, and had a little cutout, like a little torn out map in his hand that he had torn out of some local publication there in Craig, Colorado. I'm not sure what newspaper is up there, but it was a tiny little map of just to the next town, and he was basically he had no English, and he asked to be taken to the next town in the way that we communicate between each other. And I couldn't resist, even though I had my life's belongings and it was 25 below zero, because he looked just like my grandfather. And I had very halting Spanish at that time, and it was a very quiet ride, but we went north with a sideways wind blowing, trying to blow the truck over through Wyoming. If you've ever driven through Wyoming wind, you know. And we stopped at Little America, Wyoming. I talked to some line cooks there that spoke better Spanish than I did. One of them came out, found out that I knew his name was Fernando. He was a shepherd from Peru, and he was looking to get outside of Salt Lake City. So we finished the trek. I got him a train ticket and sent him on his way from Salt Lake down to where he was working, contacted the people that were picking him up. And then the next day drove, after that mystical experience with Fernando, which means traveler, by the way, I drove north up I-15 and crossed over into over Monida Pass in a blowing snowstorm, and coasted down into just south of Dillon, Montana, if you've ever been down there. And immediately, for the first time, I turned on the radio and hit the scan button, and it went through and through and through and through and through, and finally settled on a junior high girls basketball game. And I immediately felt this overwhelming sense of being home for the first time in my life. The landscape there was foreign to me, but something about this country spoke to me, and probably has to do with the identity that I'd formed growing up. I'm still writing about that. I'll let you know how it goes. You can buy the book at some point. But yeah, so that feeling of home has always resonated here in Montana, as I'm sure a lot of people. How many people are from out of state originally?
Originally?
How,
Yeah.
how many people experienced that at some point when they came to Montana or out west? So there's something there that I want to explore, because we're not alone in this feeling, and currently and historically, there's been that westering idea. So I'm not the first to consider these ideas, but in my way, I want to, because I felt so at home there, and I feel like so much of us, so much of the American way is, and it's in our DNA to go west. Young man, go west, and grow up with the country, which is a quote from Horace Greeley. It's attributed to Horace Greeley in 1865, just after the Civil War. So it's there, and it's on my mind constantly, especially when I'm driving south and going west over Nez Perce Pass into the Bitterroots, into foreign territory, and coming into a small one-room cabin to spend 3 weeks off-grid in the middle of a global pandemic, pecking away on a typewriter at some things. So here's some of that I pecked away at. So that quote is, "Washington is not a place to live in. The rents are high, the food is bad, the dust is disgusting, and the morals are deplorable. Go west, young man, go west, and grow up with the country." That was 1865. So this would be what I'm envisioning to be part of the introduction to whatever this project is. It feels like a small book is growing right now, of vignettes, and that's what I pitched to Stoney to do, was vignettes on geography and cosmography and place, and the idea of conquest and colonization, and feeling and needing to find a home. So here goes the first piece. Not that long ago, there existed both a complex tool and a good many people with the skills and knowledge needed to use it, and a real utility in society for them too, for the tool and for those versed in its use, particularly during times when you and your people either happened or chose to find yourselves in unfamiliar terrain. That tool was the print map. The good many people who made use of it, usually, though sometimes in rather unusual ways, were neither cartographers nor geographers, professional or amateur. They were, depending on who was behind the wheel of the wood-paneled station wagon and who was riding shotgun, more commonly known as mom or dad. I was born in 1983, again, not that long ago, though some days, and in most company, it sure feels like it. Young and or old as I may be, I clearly recall that bygone era when all travel beyond the well-worn ruts of everyday routine required of every American adult at least a rudimentary literacy with maps. Say you were attending a wedding or a funeral somewhere out of state, or just heading out for a hike in the woods. While you likely did not need a compass to get you there and back safely, you did at least need to know your way around a compass rose. You needed a basic working knowledge of a map key, and of the symbols in a map key, and of how to match those symbols to the features, both natural and man-made, depicted on your map. Depending on your destination and your intentions there, learning to see a mountain in a set of squiggly, labyrinthine contour lines could help you climb it. With the ability to measure the distance between, say, northeast Arkansas and southwest Montana, using the map scale, you could, with some arithmetic, make a pretty good guess at the time it would take you to cover that distance. And you'd better if you hoped to get there on time. Not that long ago, the print map was essential. It was as necessary a navigational tool for a certain people in a certain brief blip of time as the North Star had been for most all other people in all other times before. This is where rhetoric says I'm supposed to grouse. To implicate, interrogate, and convict the rise of GPS and the internet and MapQuest and smartphones and Alexa and all the other various and sundry digital technologies for the crime of colonizing the places and spaces of our formerly better, or at least more peaceful and less stressful, analog lives. Digital technologies that have invaded our offices, Our classrooms and our cars have pillaged our kitchens, our bathrooms, our bedrooms, and all the other sacred, intimate spaces of our private lives, including those most precious 18 inches in front of our eyes, which we once called our personal space, and which we protected fiercely, in which we absolutely did not want anyone or anything invading without consent, especially not some random stranger known only to us as a follower. Digital technologies that have spread outward from these inner spaces to the ends of every road we've ever built, across every sprawling prairie, into every pristine wilderness, over every open ocean to the very ends of the earth and up into the sky, into outer space, its refuse now scattered there like so much so-called space junk. Digital technologies that have conquered us so thoroughly and so entirely that all of us, rich and poor, young and old, of all races and sexes and ethnicities, have finally been made equal in our ignorance of where we are and, therefore, of who we are, stuck in a state of perpetual geographic infancy, more dependent now on Mother Siri to help us get around than on a decent map and two open eyes, or, earlier, on a clear night sky. Digital technologies, finally, that have rendered the print map an anthropological relic, a kind of modern Flintstone arrowhead or sundial, a tool not useless but no longer much in use, and that have likewise fossiled those of us who still do use maps, who still buy them at brick-and-mortar stores, who study them, who prefer them even, and who admire the best ones. I cannot, however, grouse. I like Google Maps as much as the next guy. I probably use it more too, and it would be foolish to argue that any of us alive today would be better off trying to navigate the squiggly, labyrinthine contours of our ubiquitously digitized world without a smartphone and the latest Maps app and any and as many of the other incredible technologies like them that we can afford to get our hands on. Why waste the breath arguing anyway? It's not like we can yank the train brakes now, even if we wanted to, and I'm not so sure we do. No, it is not the nature of colonizing things when arriving at an impasse to just stop, take a good look around, then reconsider and turn back. Nor is it my nature to lecture, nor my place, nor my purpose here. So, part one. Thank you. So some of the themes that I found myself wanting to explore came to me. I've been writing fiction for the last few years, a novel about a character based on myself and a character based on my grandfather, who was kind of a mule skinner, cowboy type from Northeast Arkansas. We take a covered wagon across America in the year 2016 with a taxidermied raccoon for company. So a strange trip, but pointing west. And so I've had the idea for a long time of westering in my head, and I come from a geography background and always looking to find one's place. So maps have always been a tool that I've relied on more so than others, and it's been interesting to watch in my lifetime as fewer and fewer people use maps and more people use the technologies, and to watch myself do the same thing. So I guess being off-grid, that was among the first things I wrote when I was out there. It was a pretty interesting experience to be out there for so long and to really have the silence. So when I heard about open air, I was actually I was swimming at the pool at the University of Montana over the winter, just exercising and sitting in the sauna. That's how you pronounce it according to my Finnish girlfriend. It's not sauna, it's sauna. Don't say it right, or else. So I was swimming a lot, and there was a poster there about open air, and I felt like it was the day before the deadline, and I thought, wow, that sounds like a really neat opportunity. COVID hadn't happened yet, and I was looking forward. I was looking forward to some solitude in the wilderness in the summertime, and so happened to get it. Then COVID happened, and we were all stuck at home and all self-isolating. And then it seemed kind of strange to be out in the woods by yourself, with all your friends and family out of touch and out of reach. So there was a roller coaster of different emotions that went through the process, and I'm sure Stoney was going through a lot of different things, whether or not it was going to happen, and if you're going to have to cancel these different events, and how it was going to look. So, as you know, that was my one experience, and you've all had your own. But all of those themes kept coming up to me when I was sitting there thinking about transitioning into nonfiction for my M.F.A program, which will start this fall. And I'll be in the nonfiction program, and so I was thinking about how to not write about taxidermied raccoons and fictional characters going west. And reading back at some of the other essays that I'd written in the past, and realizing that these themes kept coming up about wanting to find my place in geography, using these tools to do that, and teaching, and my role. One interesting tidbit maybe that my name is Rick White, and that means powerful ruler of white complexion, which is a really strange name to carry in this time, in this day and age when we're as active as we have been since the civil rights era, in thinking about colonization and the role of people. So I feel like a self-awareness has dawned on me, as it has most people in the last few years, about maybe some of the things that I'm doing unconsciously needs to be a little bit more conscious, and to start a lot of the writing that I did out here in the quiet was about intentionally starting to think about these things that I maybe take for granted. And my good friend Jeremy passed along a book by Gary Snyder, and a quote really struck me from an interview with Gary Snyder about us living as how we live as invaders, literally, without knowing the trees. This black cottonwood tree that you mentioned, we live without knowing where we are and what we're seeing and what we're doing. And I wanted to write with humor. I try to keep humor involved in it, and a lot of self-reflection, because I feel like there's plenty of people writing argumentative essays these days about how you should think and what you should do. So I generally tend to start from an interior motive and experience in that. So a lot of self-reflection, and generally I try to include my hound dog as much as possible for comic relief. So this next piece involves him, and my experience in that process of wanting to get, I guess, the hope for this writing, or maybe the reflection on it, is that is going through that process of feeling a little bit uncomfortable in how little I know, and wanting that to welcome other people into that space. Like, it's okay to not necessarily know and to feel that way. So we'll see how this one goes.
You know, I'm thinking about how teenage boys today are confronting the same kind of questions, and I think a lot about these kids that play Minecraft, endlessly building worlds, exploring places that don't exist in real life, but it's really the same motivation.
Absolutely, yeah. And developmentally, I think it does. It has the same, some of the same effects, certainly. And having taught middle school and high school, I would say to them, the experience of it is as vivid and as developmentally, maybe even appropriate as some of the other forms that we may have done pre those technologies. Um, I'm really curious about your experience. Do you feel like they are able to transition those skills from, say, Minecraft, a world building exercise, into imaginative things in other areas, like outside in nature?
Well, I would have to say that my particular boys are being raised by a computer geek dad. But it is interesting because I work here at Travelers Rest. You know, they do have sort of this, you know, mom coming home with stories of history and exploration and things like that. Um, and my older son is now actually volunteering here, and I think sort of taking that some of those, like, he loves maps. And all the maps that he's really familiar with are within video games.
Mm-hmm.
But now being able to look at, say, the maps that William Clark created on the expedition, he thinks about it in a totally different way.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of cool.
Yeah, I think that was the one thing I learned as a teacher was finding that way into whatever it was that was interesting, validating that, and teaching the skills through that, and then trusting that later on, when you're 37 years old, maybe you've acquired some of those skills, and you can apply it to those things that you didn't think were so cool back then, and come into yourself and come into your world a little bit more. So. Yeah, that said, I'd throw my smartphone in the river tomorrow if I could survive without it. But our world has changed, and to make that almost impossible to function. So, yeah, hard to say. Any other questions? Okay, I'll try to do this one with the mask on. I'm standing in a mountain river looking at a tree. I do not know the name of this tree or of the others here like it, those of its kind, and I am ashamed, as well I should be. By now, age 37, I really ought to know this tree, its name, a few basic identifying features, perhaps its commercial use in the paper products industry or in construction. I've lived out west now for more than half of my adult life, which equates to some third of my whole life, or about as many conscious years as those of my youth. I've undoubtedly seen trees just like these I've undoubtedly seen trees just like these 1,000 times or more. Still, I stand here in this mountain river looking at a tree, and all that comes to mind is conifer. Pitiful. If forced at gunpoint by some marauding vigilante to give a guess, I, trembling, would venture this: pine. I would be shot dead on the spot, as well I should be. Pine is what some dimwit from back east would call such a tree, and likely all the other evergreens out west also, were he to find himself smack dab in the heart of the Selway-Bitterroot wilderness, 65 miles from civilization, if the town of Darby, Montana, population 720, qualifies as such, standing in the sun one sparkling summer morning in a mountain river, looking at a tree, marauding vigilante at his side, if a 12-year-old hound dog named Finn, population 1, qualifies as such. Finn, armed with droopy gray jowls and floppy black ears, shoots me a dour look that registers somewhere between impatience and despair. Why? He says with his eyes. Why all this sudden tree-looking, man? Isn't it about lunchtime already? And it is, but that which a geriatric hound dog cannot be expected to understand, intelligent though he certainly is that this standing in a mountain river looking at a tree thing is serious business. For to identify this tree, to name it, to know it, has for me, a dimwit from northeast Arkansas, become nothing less than a matter of existential concern. Life or death, you could say. Not that if I mistake a spruce for a pine, I might die, per se, as I likely would have out here were this 1720 or 1820 instead of 2020. And as Finn is convinced he will surely die if we do not hurry up and return to the cabin and get a bite to eat. No, I will not die today, not of failure to identify this tree, but life as I have known it to date will no longer be worth living, for I will not be living it, my life, not really, and thus will not be worthy of its going on. I'll read about this map here to the left, since we're on the theme of maps. In our apartment in Missoula, on the southeast wall of the bedroom hangs, framed, a map, my favorite of the far too many that I own. It is a work of fine art. Well, it's a copy of one anyway. The beauty of this map, in my eyes, lies not in those qualities, practical and aesthetic, that I value in most other maps, like the clarity and quantity and accuracy of the information conveyed, or a balanced color scheme that's soft on the eyes, or gradient shading, for maps of mountainous terrain, of the landscape's vertical relief. No, this map is beautiful for its stark lack of those things. It is a map of white space and black lines. That's it. The space is much, the lines not so much. In its bottom right quadrant, sits a basic map scale and 1-point compass rose denoting north, but elsewhere you'll find no map key and no title either. Some lines are solid, others dashed, and the rest are looped, curled, or crossed into the capital letter shapes of the modern English alphabet. There's not a single topographic contour line on the map, and mere tick marks to mark the degrees latitude and longitude. As such, the map looks less crowded than even your average USGS quadrangle map of flat agricultural land, much less the kaleidoscopic quadrangles from this neck of the woods. There are not even lines for roads on this map. It's just rivers, mountains, valleys, and towns. And not all of the towns either, only some, and all with the same symbol, a small circle, and with all their names the same size and boldness of font, so that no matter the density or quantity of their resident human population, no matter their administrative function or dysfunction in county or state governmental affairs, all the towns, relative to the rivers between them and the mountains and valleys around them, appear uniformly insignificant. As well, I suppose they should. One guidebook of natural history I often consult describes in its early pages the region that my map portrays. The author says that geologists both know and map this region, or province in rock people speak, as the Rocky Mountains Basin and Range, which seems logical enough, even for a simple mind like mine. What makes less good sense, though, is how a map intended for specific scientific geological utility somehow found its way into the hands of a guy to whom the words Cambrian and Precambrian mean nothing and pre-nothing. A guy who'd be hard-pressed to not flunk a test on the differences between things sedimentary and things metamorphic, and who still found something in the map nonetheless. Beauty, mainly. Beauty of the same harsh, brash, black and white, leave it or love it kind that likewise resides in the real world of the map, in the flora and fauna and fungi here, and in the moody, shifty, orographic weather that its 17 mountain ranges create, quite literally, out of thin air. Mountain ranges whose rough boundaries the map outlines merely with dashed lines, and labels with names, Bitterroot, Madison, Sapphire, Pioneer, 4 in Idaho, and the rest in southwest Montana. Resides, too, that beauty in the clear, cold rivers here that etch the valleys out, the basins between the ranges, and in those towns and cities that the rivers run through, or in some places at least pretty close to. And in the rugged, spit-shine-will-do people who hunt, fish, and farm here, who ranch here, who dude ranch here, who get married here and buried here, who raise their kids to grown here, and pray they'll stick around and find decent work here, or, if not, will at least come back to visit soon and often, and maybe stay someday. People who worship here, on these rivers, and in these mountains. Harsh, brash, beautiful people, or most of them anyway. Beauty certainly, and history too. Game trails and scat piles of it, 220 some odd years worth written right into the names of those rivers and ranges, like sign, there for the reading for those who can read it, and those who care to. Not much, really. Not much history, that is. Not if we're talking deep time of John M.F.A. and company, the time of rocks and rivers and ranges, geologic time. A few centuries of human history, a hill of beans. But still, a history, one just as and no less heroic and hideous and humiliating as all the others in all the other beautiful lands as far as human histories go. And meaning, of course. Plenty of that sweet, fleeting, seasonal stuff to go around in these parts, for natives and newcomers and tourists alike. Meaning to be found, foraged, planted, picked, caught, brewed, smoked, harvested, or shot here. Meaning, or at least the gauzy illusions of it that the mind fashions from time, place, and event into story and moral of story, and then preserves, for as long as we're lucky to have a mind left, as memory.